I think it's easier to actually get some investment in oil, in all these oil resources it already has, and exploit them well. As Francisco said, like we're talking here about millions of barrels of oil that are still underneath, and it's just a matter of getting investment into the industry and exploit them and have a well-run oil industry going on in Mexico. Unfortunately, the very timid efforts of President Felipe Calderon to allow private investment in the industry were blocked by Congress. And now they're just a pipe dream with the PRI having a large majority in Congress, a large plurality. And the idea of the PRI winning the elections in 2012, well, what would happen in that scenario? We don't know. The PRI is a very pragmatic animal. Let's remember that the PRI was the one who liberalized the economy back in the 1990s. So maybe...
And also nationalized the oil industry.
But also nationalize the oil industry. So it depends on where the wind is blowing. If they actually face a very critical situation where their cow milk is running out of milk, well, they will try to then get some hands and try to expand the potential of this industry.
I agree with Juan Carlos on the issue that a realistic perspective really has to internalize the fact that this is an economy which is going to be run on oil and gas for the foreseeable future. There is a niche market for renewables, particularly wind in the north, and there are important and interesting collaborations with California, Arizona, Texan governments is something that's being studied as we speak. But this is an economy which remains very inefficient in its use of energy. It's very fossil fuel intensive. It still relies a lot on oil, among other things because the government subsidizes heavily the consumption of gasoline. So there are a whole series of issues that have to be done. It's not necessarily just privatizing or opening up Pemex. It's also teaching, or if not teaching, actually forcing the population through price mechanisms to save more, when it bites the wallet, people change their behavior. So Mexico has been very spoiled because the perception was there that we were, an ultra-rich country, that oil was never going to run out. Today, the estimates suggest that if no new oil is found, Mexico might be a net importer of crude by 2016. Now, the problem with the BP spill, and I connected to the piece we saw beforehand, is that most of the proven reserves that Mexico has are in the deep waters of the Gulf of Mexico. Around 30 billion barrels of recoverable oil are found there. If access to these resources is restrained, if we really have to put an important pause on all this after the BP catastrophe, this also questions even the medium-term perspective for Pemex. Where else are you going to go and get the oil from? Because at the end of the day, the federal government still depends on you to operate. It's a straitjacket.
But there's nothing more, one of the more depressing parts of being in Mexico is in an urban area, realizing as you're sitting in totally stuck traffic that all the thousands of cars around you are also sitting there idling, burning up unimaginable amounts of gasoline in a poor country that cannot muster the investment to build mass transit. And it's an open question whether aspirational Mexicans want to use mass transit. Now, in Mexico City, obviously that's an exception, but if you're in other urban areas, the mass transit systems are very primitive, very undercapitalized, and you wonder if a country that is starting from scratch in many of these areas might do better rather than mimicking the United States.
The whole infrastructure in Mexico is backwards. I mean, if you have something to export to the United States and you're in the South, you have to go through Mexico City. There are no roads that skip Mexico City in order to make the transport lines easier towards the United States. So that leads to a lot of inefficiencies there.
And unlike the United States relationship with Canada, where if you flip a switch in much of the northern United States, you're using Canadian electricity, the grid is not hooked up between the two countries on our southern border. And I don't know, harnessing Mexican sun would seem to be pretty cheap. There's a lot of it. But again, investment, capital, and knocking down some of these barriers that seem, if you can't get a truck across, how are you going to do some of this other more complicated stuff?
On the issue of grid interconnection, there are important opportunities. For example, Texas is the only state in the US that runs on its own grid. And given the size of Texas, a connection between Texas and Mexico would make great sense, particularly because Mexico uses a lot of natural gas for its industrial processes. This is a transition, an energy transition that was planned since the early 90s, where the government decreed that electricity generation should switch from coal-fired stations to natural gas. We've got a lot of natural gas underneath, and again, we cannot get it out due to the lack of investment. Canada and the US have a lot of natural gas, so you would see a southward flow of natural gas. At the same time that Mexico could very definitely contribute on the side of renewables, particularly wind, potentially biofuels. Mexico used to have one of the largest and most vibrant of sugarcane industries in Latin America. Emulating Brazil, not easy, but there are alternatives. I'm not just completely pessimistic.